Colorado State University releasing an update to their 2025 Atlantic Hurricane seasonal outlook. We have a face that's familiar joining us, right?
Yes, we do. We all know it. We have Fox Hurricane specialist Bryan Norcross joining us. So Bryan, okay, I guess the question is, we've already had 3 named storms in the Atlantic Basin, but did we see any changes out of this update from Colorado State?
Yeah, a little bit of a change, reflecting the fact that the pattern is very hostile out there right now, and it looks like it's going to stay that way for at least the next week to 10 days or so. So here's the late news from Colorado State. There's where we were at 17 named storms, 9 hurricanes, 4 Category 3 and above, and that represents about a 30% above average forecast, and it's reflective of what NOAA put out in May as well. And here's the new information: 16 total named storms. I have an asterisk there because 3 of them have already happened, so that's 13 more. 8 hurricanes, so just slightly above average is the bottom line in the new projection, and that new projection is has trended down because, again, we're in this very much of a lull right now. So if last year's lull, for example, which happened later in the year, if they knew that was going to happen, they would have kind of trimmed the numbers a little bit, reflecting that. But the rest of the hurricane season is forecast to be more or less normal. All right, what's going on and how do they do it? Well, they look in 3 different areas for one of their models, the statistical model, which is the one more or less they've been using for the longest time. You notice out here in the eastern Atlantic, call it predictor number 1, they are noticing that it's above normal here. Now, when they looked at all this and did the analysis, it was on June 1st. Well, since that time, it's actually cooled off out here. But back then, June 1st, it was quite warm here. So this predictor was a strong plus for pushing the numbers up. Now it's actually trended back just a little bit. Predictor number 2 is here in what's called the main development region, all across the Atlantic and the Caribbean. You notice there that it's kind of a balance of blues and oranges. Things are just slightly above normal, much cooler than last year and the year before. So that's just a slight plus based on that predictor. And then we go to the Pacific, and this is where the El Nino, La Nina comes in. And you notice we've got yellows and oranges and blues in there. So that's just about 0 in terms of plus or minus. So we're calling that a slight plus because when it's 0, that means it doesn't have much influence. Then we can get some busy seasons in this kind of neutral kind of situation where we have neither an El Nino nor a La Nina, and that is the forecast for this season. As a matter of fact, look at the computer forecast for this El Nino La Nina. If the lines were up here to the top, that would be called an El Nino. If they were down here, that would be called a La Nina. But look, it's right in the middle is where the consensus of the forecasts is. So the thinking is that that will not be an influencer. And when we have this kind of neutral season, sometimes we get very busy seasons, sometimes we get very quiet seasons. So the idea is that's just maybe a slight plus. So the bottom line is we have the 16, 8, and 3. But the models, they have a whole bunch of models. The European model, the Canadian model, the various models that do this predicting, plus the statistical model, plus a kind of a combo model that the CSU people do. When they average up all the models, they end up with 19, 10, and 5, but their forecast are these lower numbers. Now, as I said, remember, this is all back as of June 1st. And how have things developed? Well, here's where we stand when we look at the upper level winds across the Caribbean. Look, they are blazing here, and it's very, very hostile. So nothing that comes across the Atlantic is going to be able to generate in this kind of environment. And the forecast is for July for them to generally be somewhat hostile on average across July. So they've taken those June factors and kind of tamped them down a little bit and trimmed the numbers. And that's why we get the numbers that we got on the forecast that just came out here just a couple of minutes ago. So, guys, we're kind of status quo on all this. The conditions across the Atlantic are hostile for a whole bunch of reasons. One is the pressure across this part of the Atlantic is very high. The Atlantic and the Caribbean is unusually high. We have the Saharan dust, we have the hostile upper level winds, and the water is generally cool out in the tropical Atlantic and cooling in the Caribbean, actually. So for now, things are status quo and quiet is the bottom line. We're going to look ahead toward later in July for slightly more conducive conditions and some indication that maybe something will try to get going, but nothing's going to happen quickly.
Yeah, so 16, 8, and 3, down from 17, 9, and 4. I mean, there is a change, and so we note the change. Bryan, you had mentioned, too, in collaboration with the Climate Prediction Center, that new map showing the development close to the Gulf. Can you speak to about that? We have the graphic that we can pop up for you, but you know, it's near shore, right? It's off the Gulf Coast.
Yeah, so the long-range computer models do indicate a slight chance of something there. Now, if you notice, what that area means in number terms is less than a 20% chance. I mean, less than a 20% chance is pretty small. And just today, I checked out the latest run of the various long-range models, the most credible ones, the European and the new Google AI experimental model, and they are down less than 10%. So we're kind of grasping at straws here to talk about something going on in the tropics. But indeed, the idea is that some sort of a non-tropical system may dip into the northern Gulf, enhancing thunderstorms all along the Gulf Coast. And sometimes, if that low pressure gets offshore and combines with some tropical moisture, we can get something to spin up, as has happened 3 times this year already, by the way. But as of right now, the odds look quite low.
Yeah, and nothing too unusual, as you've been talking about, Bryan. And I think one thing before we leave you is interesting to note is we talked about the loose association with Barry, that moisture that went over Texas. And we also talked about Chantal, which was the first landfalling U.S. system, but led to that flooding that we saw out of portions of North Carolina through the Piedmont. So, you know, you don't have to be the closest to the coast where it ends up making that landfall to see impacts either way. So we navigate
the tropical moisture and the high terrain is a terrible combination. There's no question. Yeah.
All right, so we'll see what the season brings. Either way, that update from Colorado State University just coming out moments ago. Thank you, Bryan, for joining us and for breaking down the very latest with that.